everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is John Paul Hayworth, and I am the LGBTQ Audience Strategy Director at AARP. The continued violence and murder of our transgender brothers and sisters is unacceptable. Transgender Day of Remembrance reminds us that the legacy of the loss of so many bright lights in our community is not only our grief, but the joy they brought to the world. I want to acknowledge that I will never fully understand the transgender experience as a cis white gay man, but also that I don't need to understand to be an ally and to provide spaces for the trans community to thrive. AARP's unwavering commitment to the LGBTQ plus community reflects our core belief in the dignity, worth, and potential of every individual. Our diversity is a source of strength. Our commitment can be measured by what we say, and more importantly, by what we do. At AARP, we work hard every day to empower people to choose how they live as they age. What we do for all is a guiding principle articulated by our founder, distinguished educator, Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus, and we proudly carry it forward. I'm glad to be here to welcome you on behalf of AARP to this conversation, and I want to thank our friends at the Outwards Archives for making it possible and for their continued work to preserve our shared history. And now I'd like to introduce our host for today's event, Jack MacCarthy. Jack is an award-winning writer and artist, a non-binary human, and the communications director of the Outwards Archive. Jack?
Thank you so much, John Paul. Hello, all, and welcome. I am joining you from Los Angeles, California, on the traditional, ancestral, and stolen lands of the Tongva peoples. As a guest institution on Tongva land, Outwards makes Kuyamnawa a recurring guest exchange to the Tongva Tarahat Pahava Conservancy, the first Tongva-led organization who received the first return of land back to the Tongva people. If you'd like to learn more about how to pay a voluntary land tax to the indigenous peoples in your own area, particularly with Native American Heritage Day coming up later this week, there should be a link on how to do that in the chat, which Rhyme Ramos just posted. If you would like to see closed captions for today's webinar, you can click the CC button at the bottom of your screen that says Show Captions. And if you have any tech issues today, our behind the scenes tech wizard is Rhyme Ramos, so feel free to reach out to Rhyme in the chat if you need assistance. As mentioned, I am proudly the communications director of the Outwards Archive. Outwards records, preserves, and shares the stories of LGBTQ plus elders to build community and catalyze social change. Outwards was founded 7 years ago, and in that time, we've conducted about 300 interviews in 41 states, I believe, plus Washington, D.C. And I am honored beyond belief to moderate this panel with three very, very special Outwards interviewees, Ladyboy Gigi, Tori Cooper, and Charley Burton. And we are here to talk about Joy As Remembrance on today, the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which also we are starting to interrogate the last R in the TDOR acronym, Trans Day of Resilience, Trans Day of Resistance. We're going to meet our three panelists through short video excerpts from their Outwards interviews and then in person. So first up, we're going to meet Ladyboy Gigi. Ladyboy Gigi, MSW, is an outspoken activist for the bisexual and intersex communities. After co-producing After Hours, a radio program about human sexuality, Ladyboy Gigi created a podcast called Adult Bedtime Stories to help create a more sex-positive world through adult sexual education and BDSM performance art. Gigi also helped establish Celebrate Bisexuality Day in 1999. That same year, Ladyboy Gigi was awarded the AIB Globe Award for Outstanding Service to the bisexual community worldwide. Gigi also advocates for the healing, cathartic, and spiritual power of BDSM as founder and sacred harlot of Aphrodite's Temple, a modern-day sex temple which provides sex-positive education and a sacred play space for adults. Gigi is the author of The Dominance Handbook, an intimate guide to BDSM play, as well as the essay Walking in Shadows, Third Gender and Spirituality about their intersex identity. So Rhyme, go ahead and share Gigi's video.
I didn't learn about being intersex until much later in life, till I was 23. I remember growing up and they, everyone from my father on down to school officials kept trying to make me be more masculine. It was kind of rough growing up because I had very few friends. Almost nobody wanted anything to do with me. I was kind of the weird kid. So I think I was kind of scapegoated and looked at as the black sheep from early on. Basically, I'm partly male, partly female. And the doctors did surgeries to make me look more male, and they put me on hormones to make me more masculine. Basically, I have a penis and testicles, but I also have scarring where they set up what was my pussy. You have to be a male or a female. We live in a binary sex world. There's nothing in between. I don't even know if my parents knew. They never talked about it, but my father was a minister, and both my parents were very Christian, and they didn't talk about those kind of things. Back in the 50s, when I was born, often they just took the baby to another room, did surgeries, and then brought it back and said, "Oh, you're the proud parents of a whopping boy." Think about all these old men playing around with my genitals and playing God with them. Just felt icky and weird, and felt a violation. And I think that's why I still have anger with the medical community. Everything felt hopeless. I finally got a job working on ranches, and I did that for a couple of years. And then I had this other ranch hand that said, "Hey, I want to go to college. I want you to go with me." And I finally said, "Okay, I'll show you how bad an idea this is." And we went to college. And then I finally graduated and then got a master's degree. It was through this time period that I took a sex ed class, and I discovered that I was hermaphrodite. They call it intersex, but I like the term hermaphrodite. We have a heritage from ancient civilizations where the hermaphrodites were the shamans and the spiritual leaders. They had a function in place. It was one of my first boyfriends that got me into BDSM, and especially the healing and spiritual side. Basically, it's all about power exchange. It's one person giving up power to another and letting them take total control of the scene. For the first time in my life, I had safe words, and things would stop. And I think that alone was so empowering to that inner scared child inside. Just the feeling that things were going to get better, and that at some point my true colors were going to shine brightly in the world. Yeah, I'm weird, I'm different, and I'm proud of it, baby. I like who and what I am. And I didn't always feel that way. It was a process. But I came to love being who and what I am.
Welcome, Gigi.
Hello.
I'm so excited to be chatting with you. And my follow-up question from that bit of your Outwards interview we just saw is, in your professional opinion, why do sex and kink have such a special healing power, or at least the potential for that healing power?
I think, first of all, BDSM is loaded with paradoxes. It's amazing because erotic pain is a different kind of pain, and it transforms into this feeling of euphoria as you get into it more and more. And we call that subspace. And so when you start flying in subspace, you're no longer just in the material world, you're in the realm of the spirit. I think the other side of it is that when we do role play, it's kind of like theater. We're bringing alive something from our imaginations. And that sometimes I did scenes that were really difficult, like scenes from my past when my father beat me. And but this time I had safe words. As a kid, I didn't get safe words. I couldn't make it stop. And that was so empowering to the inner child and so healing to have that power for the first time in my life. And I think that, and just going through the process of, in our culture, we don't allow, or it's not really acceptable to express the darker side. But through BDSM role play, we can express some of those darker parts of ourselves and let them out. And once we express them, it's kind of uncorking the bottle that we've been stuffing them all in. And that too is a very healing process, because all of a sudden, all the hate and the anger and the resentment, it gets let loose and we reach catharsis through the process.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. What you're describing sounds like almost like a kind of time travel or magic, where you can return to something painful from the past and transform it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what BDSM is for me. It's going through these role plays, and it's scary going into it, but then you come out just totally transformed.
Yeah, that's so powerful. We'll go ahead.
Oh, that's partly why I wrote the book, The Dominance Handbook, because back then it was kind of a mentor training kind of thing within the community. And there was no real guidelines on how to be a good dom or how to be a good sub. And so I interviewed probably several hundred dominants before I wrote the book.
Wow. It's a lot of dominance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have more follow-up questions, but I want us to meet our other two panelists first. So next up, we're going to meet Tori Cooper. Tori Cooper is a health and equity consultant, community organizer, educator, published author, and leader in the transgender and HIV communities. She leads with more than 30 years of experience at all levels of HIV service. She now serves as the Human Rights Campaign's Director of Community Engagement for the Transgender Justice Initiative. Before joining HRC, Tori was a consultant and prevention specialist at Positive Impact Health Centers in Metro Atlanta. In 2015, Tori created Advocates for Better Care Atlanta, LLC, an organization dedicated to the education and empowerment of marginalized people across the country, which prioritizes transgender women and men, as well as people living with HIV. Tori has received numerous awards for her work. Her work is featured in a new documentary, Silent Epidemic, where she talks about the trans community and HIV in the South. And she is currently matriculating towards her MA in public health. So let's see Tori's video from her Outwards interview.
When it comes to acceptance for my transness, I didn't change who I was. I never did. My birth name is Tori. So I didn't even change my name. I started using the term trans really specifically here in Atlanta as a political statement to make myself part of community and also to combat stereotypes. If we view masculinity and folks who identify as men as being more dominant in society, then there are people who feel that people who transition to womanhood have downgraded themselves in society, that you have given up a certain amount of privilege. And whether it's a spoken rule or an unspoken rule, that's how people feel. Our issues are just compounded because of this archaic and barbaric thinking that white cisgender heteronormative behavior and bodies are the ideal, and that's not the case. If so many of us embrace the title trans and identify as trans and live what public health would say is a non-stereotypical life, then we're really in our own way changing the narrative, because trans people have always existed. There have always been trans women, even when we didn't have the word for it. As a very binary Black woman who happens to be trans, it took a while for me to even understand the concept of non-binary. Because I used to use boy pronouns and I used girl pronouns, and that was it. There was really no in between for me. I've also had to come to understand that even me, if I tell people that gender and sexuality are two different notions, I had to also understand that about our community as well. Younger people come in on it. Leadership in trans communities is going to continue to get much, much younger. What I hope and pray does not happen is that they forget what folks like myself, and certainly many, many folks who have been before me and before our generation of activists and advocates, that they will take into consideration the plight that many of them did. Because when I was younger, all we wanted to do was just survive. That's all we wanted to do. We wanted to live and survive. As we see more younger people identifying as queer and somewhere on the spectrum and not using pronouns and using various pronouns, that's going to be a big shift in thinking, and it's also going to be wonderful for everybody. If it's a win for trans people, then it's going to be a win for non-trans people also.
Hello, Tori. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. And my follow-up question for you is, in response to people who have this idea that trans women have supposedly downgraded themselves, given something up, what are the gifts of transition that they're not seeing? And another way to ask this might be, what have been some of your experiences of gender euphoria?
So I would say, first of all, thank you for having me. As you can see, I actually cut my hair since we did that interview and completed my MPH. So
congratulations.
Yeah, but that's part of Trans Joy. Trans Joy, for folks like me who have transitioned into our fullness, is being able to live completely authentically. There's joy in that. There is joy in not having to fall into stereotypes. There's joy in defying those stereotypes. There's also joy. I'm glad I wore a bra today. There's also joy in simply living and existing as in the body, in the spirit, in the fullness of who I believe God is intended.
Yes, yes. There's a quote I'm thinking of. I won't get it exactly right. The person behind this quote, their first name is Julian. I don't remember the last name, but why did God make me trans? For the same reason he made wheat but not bread, grapes but not wine, because he wanted me to have a hand in my own creation.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I don't think I ever thought of it. But what I did, so I actually took classes at seminary many, many years ago, and I got the exact opposite response as what I thought I was going to get. I went in and this is part of Trans Joy. I thought seminary was going to condemn me to hell. And the truth is, because I have been very fortunate, even as a young person, to have looked a certain way, people didn't expect a trans woman in seminary, so nobody ever asked me. And so I got to ask questions and experience it just as a Black woman. And I found out some truths. I found out what the Bible really says and what it doesn't. I was able to hear what clergy were thinking instead of what they were teaching. And I'll be darned, it actually affirms who I am and who we are. It was right there the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking of another part in your interview where you say, like, me and God talk all the time. Like, we're good.
We're good. We're good. We're good. And I hope, if I understand that everyone doesn't ascribe to the same higher power that I do, And some folks may not have a higher power. They may feel that this is it, and that's entirely up to them. And you may call God something else. Whatever it is, whoever you believe in, whatever you believe in, I think what's most important is that you understand that you are loved. And you're loved not because of how you came into the world, but how you leave the world and what you leave the world. I think those things are most important. The things that you do while you're here to impact your life and the life of others is actually what leads you to whatever the next realm is. And if you're able to live that with some trans joy, how can any higher power be upset with that?
Amen. Amen. I'm a lapsed Catholic myself, but felt the need for an amen.
Great. I dated a couple of
them. I'm going to introduce our final panelist, Charley Burton. Charley Burton, Charlottesville, Virginia native, conducts speaking engagements and trainings through his company, Charley Speaks, sharing his experience as a Black trans man in the South. Charley is a board member of Equality Virginia. He was appointed by Governor Northam to the LGBTQ+ advisory board. He's the founder of Diversity in Recovery, an organization to provide safe recovery spaces for the LGBTQ/BIPOC community. Charley has been named an Outstanding Virginian by Equality Virginia, received the Community Root Award by Black Pride RVA, and Caring for the Community for Above and Beyond Voice for Equity by United Way of Greater Charlottesville. Charley manages and trains people with disabilities at WorkSource. He is currently enrolled at Morehouse College, and he is the author of The Boy Beneath My Skin, available on Amazon. Charley also founded the group Black Trans Men Can Cook and is editing the first cookbook created solely by trans men, coming in 2024. Welcome, Charley, and let's see that video.
At about 17, I just started getting more depressed. I was going to class when I wanted to. I was drinking, I was drugging, and I ended up in this private hospital because my parents had decent insurance by working for the school system. I remember them talking to my parents and telling my parents that I was confused about who I was. The psychiatrist sat me down and said, "Do you want to be a boy?" I just said, "I want to be dead." And I think that was the most truthful thing that I could say, because I didn't know. I didn't know what gender was, and it would take 30 more years for me to understand what trans was all about. 30 years. 30 years for me to finally look and say, this is who I am. And I fought it all the time. I was hospitalized a total of probably 70 plus times, in and out from ages 17 until I was probably in my 50s when I got sober. Many of them were suicide attempts. So at that point, I trusted nothing that had MD behind it at all. I would go to places to try to get help, and I wasn't getting any help. But what I realized, I wasn't really helping myself either. I remember one psychiatrist sat me down, looked at me, and he said, "You are going to live a very pathetic life." And he used one word that stuck with me until I walked in the rooms of AA. He said, "You're a very unfortunate soul." And it wasn't until I walked in AA on May 22nd, 2006, and they read How It Works. And in How It Works, it says, the unfortunates. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm getting sober. I'm getting sober because I heard that about 30 years ago, and I'm not going to continue to live unfortunate. AA has saved my life. AA not only saved my life, AA allowed me to get a footing on life, that I could get the therapy that I needed. I am a solid guy. You know, I'm a productive member of society when I was not a productive member of society before. But today, you know, I'm a taxpayer. I live in a house. Now I'm at the top of the heap of my job. And one of the biggest accomplishments in my life is that I was speaking at a panel about a year and a half ago, medical students. One of the medical students asked me, if I had any regrets in life. And I said, yeah, I regret I didn't get sober sooner. I regret that I didn't transition sooner. And I regret that I didn't finish school. She said, Morehouse is now accepting online classes and accepting trans men. And me, I think you look like you're a Morehouse man. So I applied to Morehouse College and I got accepted. Right now I'm almost finished. And I've carried a 4.0 average the entire time. My classmates of 140 know me. They know that I'm trans. They know that I'm an older guy. They accept me. I've been voted Morehouse Man of the Month in March last year by my peers. Life is good, and everything that happened to me 50 years prior, I do not regret. It had to happen in order to get me where I am today.
That video just always gives me chills and makes me a little verklempt, and it's amazing to be here with you. And Charley, you have composted such an epic amount of pain into a life that seems to bring you great joy and pride. And this is not at all a softball of a question, but what do you see as the relationship between pain and joy in your life?
Hey, Jack, and hello, everyone. And thanks for such a great panel, being on a panel with such great people. I get teary every time I see that video, every time I watch it, because it reminds me of where I was in the struggle to get where I am today. And, as I said, AA saved my life. But if any of you are in recovery or trying to recover, or, when you're out there in the streets, and I chose to be in the streets, I didn't have to be out in the streets because I wasn't from, my family didn't, the streets was my drug. And what I learned out in the streets was that if anybody took care of me, they stayed in my back pocket, and vice versa, because we had to look out for each other there. And I brought that same understanding when I came into first recovery. So it was almost like, if I lose weight, I'd feel better. If I found the perfect woman, I would feel better. If I found the perfect job, I would feel better. If I stopped drinking, I would feel better. Well, I did all those things. And at 50, I was ready to blow my brains out 5 years sober, because I had not found the joy that I needed in life. And that joy was becoming to live my authentic self. And so as I started moving into living my authentic self, I had to learn how to maneuver, first as a trans man, and then secondly, as a Black man. As a Black man, not just a Black man in the South, just a Black man, period, with everything that was going on with the unrest, the George Floyd, the Tony McDade, all those things that were happening in life. I had to learn how to maneuver in a safe manner. And the one thing that I have learned in my life is that I cannot live in fear. And so I adapted this joy through all the pain that I've gone through. Everything that I've gone through, I'm extremely grateful that I had to. Every drink, every drug, every suicide attempt, every no, every yes, everything that I had to go through has put me here today, sitting on a panel talking about joy. If somebody had told me 10 years ago, you'd be talking about joy, I would tell them to go F themselves, because I would never understand the word joy. I didn't even know it. Today, I look in the mirror and I'm like, you know what? For 63, you ain't that bad, dude. Life is okay. And, we have what AA is called life on life's terms. I deal with it every day. But I wake up in the morning and the first thing I say to myself is, I am still alive and I'm still moving. And I will continue to advocate and teach young minds, young trans guys, young people that are in recovery, and just tell them that you too can experience this joy that I'm beginning to experience.
Yeah. Wow. And I don't know how much panelists are paying attention to the chat, but there is just so much like love being showered your way, all three of you. And I want to bring everyone on screen for this part of the conversation, because something that was an inspiration for this event was the murder of someone who, as far as we know, was a cis Black man, O'Shea Sibley, who was murdered for voguing at a gas station. And there were protests in the form of voguing, and there was this tremendous Vogue as an act of resistance demonstration, and just seeing this reclamation of the thing that this person was murdered for, you know, even though, as far as you know, he was a cis man, but for being improperly masculine, and seeing the reclamation of that, and the like insistence on joy, just struck me as so defiant and so powerful. And so I wanted to hear from each of you, like your thoughts on joy as defiance in a world trying to take our joy, or in many ways trying to take our joy. You know, there are multiple. The world contains multitudes, and so do we. But thoughts on joy as defiance. Anyone can start.
I'll go. Basically, they did reassignment surgery on me when I was an infant. And then on top of that, they circumcised me. And one of the most joyful parts of my life is when I restored my foreskin. It took me 1.5 years to stretch it back out. And that was so empowering, because you know, today, doctors won't let me be what I was born to be. I have to be a male or a female. I can't be both. But I want to be both. That's what I was born to be. But by restoring my foreskin, that gave me such defiant joy, because in spite of what they did to my body, I still had control and could fix part of it.
I love that act of rebellion and reclamation. Thank you for sharing.
And reclaiming. I mean, I was reclaiming a part of myself that they tried to take from me. And that's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
So speaking of powerful things, I heard each of us offer something different that for trans, non-binary, intersex folks, everybody other than cis folks, could really present, could be considered troubling. And one was either relinquishing power or taking power and control, which Ladyboy Gigi talked about. Another was sobriety, which Charley talked about. And the third was religion, that I talked about. For a lot of trans folks, and I'm using trans to cover the whole spectrum of people, for a lot of us, those are three things that many of us have issues with. In part, we don't trust people enough to give up control and power. Sometimes we don't trust ourselves enough to function in society as a sober person, because sobriety is where you feel the pain. And religion has been used to kill us rather than to help us live. And so I appreciate the fact that each of us offered something, some tool that folks could take and use for our good rather than our own detriment. I appreciate that. And I hope that folks will get all of that out of this conversation. Thank you, Mason. I'm a facilitator. And so those are the things that I heard. Those things, along with how great Charley's tie was.
Yeah, there's no denying the power of that bow tie.
When I got sober in Charlottesville, Virginia. Okay, so let's just break Charlottesville, Virginia down. All right, it is what it is. August 12th was exactly what Charlottesville, Virginia is all about, and there's no need to hide it. And the rolling hills of Thomas Jefferson and all that BS, Charlottesville is. And so when I walked into the rooms of AA, I was the only Black. I was identifying as a butch woman at that time. I was the only butch. And I had to make a choice. Am I going to stay in here and compare myself out, or I'm going to get in here and join forces with them? And a lot of them was more than likely taking bets that I wasn't going to stay long. I was angry. I didn't fit the mold of the leather shoes and the MDs behind their name. I had a lot of street gang going on with me. But the one thing that I did, and I kept saying to myself, I'm going to stay sober out of spite until I can stay sober out of love. And I did the same thing when I transitioned. I was like, I can transition and be quiet and go stealth and live my life, or I can transition and get in people's faces and let them see that this is what it looks like to be a Black trans man, that I can maneuver in the same spaces that you maneuver in. I can do and say the same words. I can sit at your table and eat your food and expect for you to sit at my table and chomp mine down as well, because we're all one. And I want you to know that I'm no different than you are, only because I was born with some parts that you don't understand. I'm still a man. And I'm still a man, and I'm still a man that's going to get out here and fight for my brothers and sisters who do not have the voice that I have. And then one day, when I'm finished with my voice, they can carry that torch on.
Wow. This is bringing up a question for me, because each of you have like made the choice to be leaders, and I'm sure are aware that you are role models and possibility models to people who see you. And I know that can be all of you are out here doing so much, making the world better for people, and in those positions of leadership and visibility, what's the dance you have to do in order to be able to do that work, find joy in it, and also take care of yourself and not burn out, and also let yourself be the flawed, soft human that we all are in our completeness too. No big deal.
Well, the flaws are what makes us human. I think anyone whose goal is to be perfect has already lost whatever battle that they were attempting to conquer. I know of these folks, and I Googled everybody. Let me also say that. And I've heard of Charley, though we had not met before. But one of the things that I realized is that in human life, some of the best successes come out of failure. Sobriety is not, it's a lifelong journey. It's not, it's just, the truth is you're only sober for today, because you never know what tomorrow's going to bring. I'm a bit of a square. I never got into those things because I knew what was going to happen if I did. But what I realized is that for early on, and for so many others like me, once I got a little tiny bit of freedom and was able to express myself in the way that I truly am, there was no going back. I got my makeup wrong a lot. I wore the wrong clothes a lot. I talked to people inappropriately a lot. I did a whole bunch of crazy things, but those were all part of the journey. Those were part of the transition. That's a word. Transition is not, to the way that I think about it, transition is not just from point A to B. It's from A to wherever you end up. And it is an ongoing thing. And I think when we think about our life as a series of transitions, then it allows us to, first of all, be more gentle with ourselves, understand and empathize with folks in our community, and then also want to fight even harder against the system.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You know, for me, and I know people get sick of hearing me talk about it, but this place, that Alcoholics Anonymous, I can't even describe what it's done for my life. I just can't. You know, it was two old white men in 1935 decided to get together and try to help each other stay sober. And that's what I learned early on, is that the most important thing that I can do in order for me to stay sober one day at a time is to be of service. And so I took that be of service from AA and I applied it to my life, to my brothers and sisters out here. You know, I got to be of service. And I don't tally at the end of the day how many people I help. What I tally at the end of the day is that I have been able to maneuver through life without flipping you the bird or counting how many things you have in the grocery line. If you're supposed to be in the 12 line and you've got 16, you know, that's who I am sometimes. And as Tori said, I am extremely flawed. But that flawed sense of who I am, when you pull back all those layers of flawness, there's like from time to time, this beautiful diamond just shines. And that's what keeps me going every day. And that's what keeps the joy in myself. And then another thing that I'll add quickly is that I burned out. I burned out about a couple of years ago. I burned out and I had to step away from places that people didn't like for me to step away from, but I had to step away from them in order to save me. I had to be able to take care of myself, and I had to learn how to do that.
I think for me, one of the things that I discovered was finding my passions. If you feel passion in something and then pursue it, it transforms your life in amazing ways. And one of my passions and my vision is to create a more sex-positive world. We live in a Christian-dominated world here in the U.S. where sex equals sin. And I've told people on my podcast, I say, you know, the Creator designed our bodies with sexuality that we could receive amazing pleasures and give amazing pleasures to each other. I think it's a slap in the face of the Creator to call it a sin. It's a gift. And so part of me is really pursuing this path of being defiant. I know the Facebook police, sex police, have shut me down a few times. If you even use the word sex on Facebook, it sends up red flags. We're living in such a sex negative culture. And I think it's a shame that even a married couple can't get a decent, accurate sex education in our world. Even those that are blessed through marriage in the church can't get an adequate sex education. They have to learn it instinctively. And that's not always a good way to learn it. So I pursue my path of creating a more sex-positive world, talking openly about sex, and not looking at it as something sinful and bad, but as a gift from the Creator.
Yeah.
One of the things, Gigi, if I could add to that a little, one of the things I realized before transition, I'm 53. My physical transition started exactly 30 years ago. I started buying this stuff I just call it stuff. That's what it was. It was this cream and these pills that I would buy from the back of dirty magazines, in part because I like the dirty magazines. But what I realized is that as I flourished in my transition, I thought I had good sex before, But when my body started adjusting the way that I wanted, and I became more of a buxom Black woman, I realized I was really enjoying sex. And it dawned on me that some people weren't enjoying their sex lives because they didn't like the bodies that they had.
Mm-hmm.
I gained a lot of weight. And I say this, I'm using I statements here, but in talking with a lot of people, they're sharing similar experiences. I gained a lot of weight in part because of the hormones and because I like food. Chef, trans chef. And what I realized then is because there was more to me to love, I already loved myself, not in an egotistical way, but I loved myself enough to live in my authentic self. And therefore, I was able to express myself sexually in ways that I didn't even think was possible before. And I reap the benefits from them every time I have sex. And so do my partners. And I think if we're able to articulate that to people, maybe we won't get buzzed on Facebook as much. And maybe we'll be able to make TikToks and Instagram stories that are uplifting to people and help them to discover more about themselves, and in turn, help them to have more fulfilling sex lives, and then to find more trans joy, even on a day like today, Trans Day of Remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about food and sex and
Perfect combination.
Combo.
yeah. And Charley, I just, this is purely selfish on my part. I just want to know more about Black trans men can cook and like where that came from, and what need was that created to fill?
So thanks Zach, for asking that. I come from a Black family where let's have a potluck. I love that. Perfect. So I come from a family that expressions of food, expressions of life is through food. And I never thought that I was the cook because I was always fighting being in that kitchen because it was too girly. But what I did was I was circling around like the tricky, cunning, baffling, powerful mind that I have and watching these recipes and watching my mother cook. So during the whole time of Zoom Worlds, Equality Virginia had their first Equality Virginia had their first TIES conference, which is called the Transgender Information and Empowerment Summit, and they had it on Zoom. And we had a round table where we had a round table discussion for people of color. And we broke off into a breakout room, and I asked the question, how many of you guys know how to cook? And many of them said they didn't. So I said, well, let's just kind of gather once a month in Richmond, and we'll just talk about, how to cook and share some food. And once I got with these guys, I realized it was a bigger project than what was just to sit around and eat pizza and talk about food. Stories started coming out. And one guy's story was so powerful that made me say, oh, no, you know what? We need to tell this story. He said, I never wanted to cook in the kitchen because I lived with my auntie. And my auntie always had all these men coming in. And I was being sexually abused in the kitchen. So therefore, I never wanted to even learn how to cook. But I want to be able to fight that demon and conquer it by learning how to cook from you. And so I started thinking, and I was like, these not only do they have recipes from their aunties and their grandmas, and their mothers, they also have a story tied to it. Because it's food and stories for Black. Food is just not just food for Black people. There's a story behind it. Every recipe that my mother had, there was a story behind the recipe. There's a story behind this cake that she used to make, or there was a story behind how you bake this chicken. And that's how Black women back in my day knew how to express themselves, was through food. You took care of your man, you fed him good. You know, you took care of your family, you fed them well. One of the most important places is that kitchen table where you would sit down and, you know, we weren't like the Huxtables, you know, explaining what was great for our day. It was that we had to nourish our bodies, go to sleep so that my parents could work those 3 jobs so that they could put that food on that table. And so that table was a very important piece. And that's when I realized that that kitchen table was such an important piece for these young men. And so as we moved through, I got with my publisher who had published my book, and we started pitching ideas around. And then the last thing that we did was that I said, we need to heal from the racial divide that's within our trans community as well. And so Black Trans Men Can Cook is sponsoring trans men who can cook. And so there's guys who have Latino recipes. There's guys who have all walks and colors of life. About 20 of us are in this book that will hopefully be coming out about February of next year. And each recipe has a story, and each story has a recipe. And so that's how this whole thing came about. And then I have my own book that I'm creating that are stories from my mother and her cookbook, and the love that the two of us shared at the very few last months of her life, where we talked about kitchen and cooking. And it was much more than just food. It was a bond that the two of us made together that healed every bit of hurt that the two of us had. And that's what I'm sharing in my book as well.
Wow. Wow. And I keep saying wow today because you all just keep blowing my mind. But that story about going back to the kitchen after the kitchen was such a traumatic place made me think about Gigi talking about kink as a tool for like revisiting and transforming painful memories. And we also have an audience question from David Straken, fellow Outwards interviewee, intersex activist, who says, I don't think of myself as a man or woman, but I am both male and female. Have any of you felt this way? And I especially wanted to ask Gigi about like, when did you arrive at claiming Ladyboy for yourself, and what's that journey been?
Even before I knew I was intersex, as a kid, the boys didn't want me in the all-boys club because I wasn't boy enough. And the girls didn't want me at the slumber parties because I was too not girl enough. And I knew that, you know, I kind of felt like an alien, or maybe I was a changeling. And I snuck into the women's bathroom and tried that out to see if it fit better. And I thought, no, this doesn't quite work either. What am I? And then I came across a word that just lit up my soul. The word was androgynous. And I said, that's what I am. And it wasn't until years later I learned about hermaphrodites and about being bisexual and being polyamorous and a whole host of other kind of labels that I go, oh, okay, these are part of who and what I am. And I took on the term Ladyboy because I celebrate my ancestors who were the shamans. Think the word shaman, she-man. A lot of them were either trans or intersex. And it was believed by the ancients because we could transverse between the male and the female. It prepared us to transverse between the material world and the non-material realm.
Yeah.
So
The word androgynous and androgyny were very powerful for me as a young person too. I gravitated to that word more than a decade before I understood that I wasn't cisgender, but that was a special word for me too.
Oh, I wrote it down, and being dyslexic and ADHD, it was hard for me to write back then. but I wrote it and wrote it and wrote it and said, this is me. That's
Mhm.
where the light bulb just went off with me.
Yeah. We're coming to the end of our time. And I want to give each of you a chance to like talk about what you're working on and plug anything you want to plug. And so I wanted to start with Tori and the Trans Justice Initiative and anything else that that you want to share.
Awesome. Well, it's been a joy being here with you all today. And yes, I'd like to plug the work that we do at the Human Rights Campaign. I think I'm pointing underneath the logo.
Yeah,
Yes,
you are.
I've been practicing. So the Transgender Justice Initiative, we're a national program, and we operate under 4 pillars, and that's capacity building, assistance, economic empowerment, public safety, and strategic communications. And so everything we do is around that. And I just want to remind everyone that on the Transgender Day of Remembrance, where nationally and around the world, we recognize all the trans and non-binary and intersex folks who've been killed due to fatal violence, that having joy and finding joy, especially on a day like this, is an act of resilience. And it also really makes tomorrow even better, because we have to live our lives so that others don't have to die and their memories don't die.
Yes, yes, and just the work of interviewing you all and interviewing Outwards has committed in the next 3 years to devoting 50% of our interviews to transgender, non-conforming, and intersex folks, and part of that is about showing people like you can live a long life, and yeah, I think that our joy is literally life-saving and life-giving.
And if I may add, whether it's long or short, you can live a happy life.
Yes.
I think that's
Yes.
even more, the quality of the days is better than the length of them, if you ask me.
Yes, yes, quality over quantity. Yeah. Gigi or Charley, anything else you'd like to share and plug?
Yeah. One of the things I've been working on these past few months is creating sex educational training videos and BDSM training videos. And I decided to make them free of charge. I'm spotlighting, some of them are series, like I've got body image healing training is the first one I just launched yesterday on the podcast. And on my website, I've got worksheets and transcripts of the show. But basically, it's a process that I went through that was so empowering, because I hated myself when I came out of high school. And through this process of kind of I thought I was way too skinny and scrawny, and who would want to date me? I'm clumsy. And so I started doing things to change. And part of it is body image healing work. Part of it is learning how to communicate with a partner about what I desire in bed, because we so seldom do. We just kind of jump in and do it. So I've got an erotic body map where you can map out your erotica and share it with your partner. It's both a verbal and nonverbal communication tool to express what your desires are. And it takes some of that angst out of communicating it. Because too often we think, oh, I can't communicate about this. What are they going to think of me if I tell them that I like to suck dick and eat pussy at the same time? That's weird. And so, and I've had gay guys that, oh, you like to eat pussy? I'm not touching your mouth. So it's learning to love ourselves for who and what we are, and really starting to change our self-talk, our mind talk. And so a lot of the trainings I go through, I teach about Taoism and tantric sex techniques. They're all woven into these trainings. So those are available free of charge on my podcast.
Thank you, Gigi.
Hmm.
And so the most important thing that I want to be able to push is that if there's anyone out there, or if you know anyone out there that is struggling with drugs and alcohol, there's a space for you. If you don't think you have a space, and that's Diversity in Recovery. We meet every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time via Zoom. So just please reach out to me. And then the final thing is my book. If you need a signed copy, just go on to charleyspeaks.com, or you can purchase from Amazon.
Thank you so much. Tori had to run because today is a very busy day for her, as well as for all of you. So we are going to wrap up, and just something we do at the end of Outwards meetings is we sprinkle fairy dust to say goodbye. So I'm blowing fairy dust on all of you panelists and attendees. Thank you all so much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.